10 videoher, které revolucionizovaly videohry. Děkuji.
Some games over the course of many years have come out and are so special or nail a certain thing just right that it changes the rest of the games in that genre forever. Here are some games that really shook up existing genres. We got 10 trips down memory lane, so let's get started off with number 10. Let's talk Half-Life, maybe specifically Half-Life 2. This is
Ale my jsme o Half-Lifeu jsme včera mluvili 2,5 hodiny, takže já to zrovna tady skipnu, jo.
One that certainly revolutionized the genre, but it's hard to narrow it down to one specific key way. Half-Life 2 did a lot of things. It was a first-person shooter with a really strong, compelling, and unique story, something that we hadn't seen told in any other games, from the enemy types, the characters, the way those characters express their emotions, the aliens, everything in it was special, and the fact that the game just had a very unique...
Já člověče zmíním jednu jedinou věc, a to je ta Gravity Gun. Já si člověče myslím, že všechny hry po Half-Lifeu chtěly mít vlastní Gravity Gun. A je strašně jakoby zajímavý, že zrovna tato hra od Valve tak byla první, která to udělala. A přijde mi, že jediná, která to udělala dobře. Jediná prostě. Já to fakt jako nechápu, že to doteďka nikdo pořádně neskopíroval tohle.
Very advanced physics system. The game knew that it had this technology behind it, so it would give you scenarios and puzzles where you would need to use physics and take advantage of the game's systems in order to progress. That's something that other games played around with before Half-Life 2, of course, but Half-Life 2, with all its tech behind it and the way it did it, really popularized it and pushed those concepts to the next level. Just like the original Half-Life came out and was like, wow, holy shit.
Tak to je možná dobrý point. Je tady někdo, kdo jste hráli Half-Life 2 na launch? Jak vám přišly ty vozítka? Mně teda ty vozítka přijdou takový docela už dneska jako Lidl, že prostě jako já to chápu, ale že mi přijde, kdyby to dneska udělal někdo, tak je to spíš takovej jako protažení herní doby, než aby to bylo jako zajímavý. Nikdo. OK, dobrý, pojďme dál.
Look at this crazy cool first-person shooter with an interesting and intriguing, mysterious story. Half-Life 2 did that on a grander scale with better shootouts, more physics, and of course the iconic City 17. It definitely revolutionized the first-person single-player adventure genre, which isn't really as much of a thing anymore, but at the time, I think a lot of other game makers were looking at this game going, wow, how can we even top that? And to be totally frank, in a lot of ways, Half-Life 2 hasn't been topped to this day. I mean, maybe Half-Life Alyx in some ways.
Je to kámo děsivý, no. Já jsem to taky říkal vlastně včera u toho Half-Life, že doteďka tady nebyla žádná revoluční FPS hra, a to je 2004, kámo. 2004. Ne 14, ale 4, kámo.
But Half-Life 2 was just different. You really had to be there. Granted, it also revolutionized like a whole sub-industry of mods and completely different games built out of the Half-Life 2 engine and source and everything. Half-Life 2's roots run deep in gaming, and you still see those roots to this day. Next, over at number 9, we have Arma. Yes, believe it or not, the military simulator was incredibly unique for the time because it just took itself so seriously. Everything was detailed, everything was thought out. There were military simulators before Arma, but...
Ale čete, pomožte mi, na Armě byl postavený operace Flashpoint, anebo to bylo separátní hra? Pamatuje si to někdo, tohle? Tuší někdo? Protože tohle snad má někdy, co fakt jo nevím. Operace je Arma 1. Nechápu, takže operace Flashpoint tak je Arma 1 a až jakoby od Army 2 to byla Arma. Je takhle, aha. OK, dobrý, tak to jsem nevěděl.
After Arma, other ones really had to step their game up in terms of realism, passion, everything, really. And then Arma also served as a solid base, a solid foundation for things in the future. It's because of Arma that we kind of have so many things like DayZ, PUBG Battlegrounds. It just feels like it all originated from Arma's system.
Díky této hře máte Fortnite, kindři, takže si toho važte. Češi můžou za to, že můžete utrácet peníze ve Fortniteu.
I mean, DayZ directly was a mod of Arma, and from there, budding developers would go on to tweak that and make their own experiments, and from those modders tinkering and messing around with games like this and similar games, we got the Battle Royale genre. I know it's kind of like a big web, a big like Pepe Sylvia type of connection to make, but it's definitely there. Arma doesn't really get...
Ne, tak někdo, kámo, zase taková síť. Byla Arma, z Army ti vznikla moderská scéna, z té modelské scény ti vzniknul Daisy mod, a potom se ti Daisy osamostatnil a z Daisyho ti vyšlo všechno ostatní, že? Od Daisy tak vyšlo Heezy, H1Z1, no Heezy, a potom vedle Heezy taky začala říkat ostatní BRka, že jo? Ať už to bylo PUBG, Fortnite a zbytek, no. Je taky docela zajímavý v tom vidět, no. Moje první BRko tak bylo H1Z1 a toho nikdo nespomíná, no protože Heezy už je starý, že jo? Taky dneska, no. Ano, tam je takových právě, jak týpek říkal, jakoby poměrně hodně sítí. Je to třeba jako s Warcraft 3, jo. Ty jsi prostě měl Warcraft 3 a z Warcraftu 3 ti vychází Dota a z Warcraftu 3 a z Doty ti vychází LOLko. A takhle prostě postupně můžeš pokračovat dál, ty vole, jo. Ale vedle toho, tak ti ještě třeba z Warcraftu 3 a z Doty, ty nový Doty, vycházejí třeba ty vole Tower Defense simulátory a teďko najednou TFT, tak vlastně vychází z Doty 2, ty vole, jo. Což je úplně šílenství, takže to je fakt takový celý strašně zajímavý vědět, kde se tohleto prostě jako tak nějak změnilo, no. Je to docela zábavný. Je to docela zábavný, no. Autočesy právě taky, no. Heezy vyšlo z Battle Royale modu v Armě 3, nejdřív bylo PUBG a pak Heezy? Počkej, ne, PUBG nevyšlo před Heezy. Heezy bylo daleko před PUBG. První bylo Daisy, pak bylo Heezy a pak bylo PUBG. A pak vyšel Fortnite. Takhle postupně to bylo. Doslova si to, jak ne? Ne Heezy jako survival hra? Ježíš, to je halus tohleto. Takže on byl ještě nějaký Heezy mod, jo. Jo, takhle, jakože Heezy mělo survival a nebylo to BRko? Aha, tak to jsem zase nevěděl já tohle. Dobrý, to jsem nevěděl. Takže ono to je vážně jakoby síť prostě v tomhletom. OK. Ještě byl Jay-Z. Yes, ještě tam byl Jay-Z, no.
Get enough credit to this day for how it has shaped gaming and how it has changed some things up, but it really did. It deserves a big amount of props. Next over at number 8 we have Dark Souls.
Abychom tady byli člověče úplně féroví, ono je pravda, že Fortnite vlastně úplně původně byl Tower Defense, že jo? Fortnite byl původně survival. A ten survival, já se dokonce z toho mám, kámo, někde jako let's play, ty vole, že jo, ještě. Ježišmarja. Kde to mám? Největší Fortnite event vůbec, Travis Scott koncert. Vážně mám reakce na Travise Scotta. Skvělý. Kde to je? Fortnite before... Jak se to kurně jmenovalo s tím Stormem? Pamatuje si to někdo? Mě má, ty vole, vypadlo úplně jméno. Save the World to bylo, jo. No, tohle je ono. Taky to bylo, kámo, zábavný, no. Takže prostě overall si myslím, že ten mod byl jakoby primární a oni pak omylem udělali to BRko a to BRko totálně vlastně, ty vole, zazdilo Save the World, že jo. Jakoby pokud vím, tak hraje to dneska ještě někdo. Kámo, vidíte ten Witchwood background? Takhle to vypadá, že se snaží Hearthstonení hráč dělat reakce na jiný videohry. Ježíši Kriste, ty vole. Good fucking times.
Dark Souls was incredibly influential towards RPGs, action RPGs. You see it to this day. I mean, we're mentioning Dark Souls specifically because Demon's Souls, of course, released first. It was really like the first attempt at that now tried and true FromSoft Souls-like style thing, but it was really relegated to just the PS3, and it was Dark Souls that really kicked that concept into the mainstream. And once Dark Souls...
Já tady trošku doplním, já si osobně myslím, že dost možná ten opravdový mainstream je ten Elden Ring, který to fakt, ty vole, totálně jako zazdil pro všechno ostatní.
At least it was really off to the races with Souls-inspired games, Souls-like style RPGs. And it's not just the fact that it's a hard, challenging game. No, there's more to it. It's how you build out your character, how those stats work, really how the levels flowed. And of course, the addictive loop of going out on a run, trying to get as far as you can, farming those souls to hopefully get back to your camp to level up and not die and lose them all. Granted, that formula has different levels of complications depending on the game you're playing, but other developers clearly loved From Software. games and have taken that concept and ran with it. We've seen so many games either completely try to ape a Souls-like game and just make a similar type of thing, or cherry pick little elements here and there. And ultimately, I think for the most part, gaming is better for it. It's easy to argue that not every developer or studio should make a Souls-like game. We don't need every game to be a Souls-like game. I'm sure.
Je velmi dobrý point, že z Dark Souls vyšel Hollow Knight a to jsou prostě podle mě 2 z nejlepších her všech dob. Kdybychom jakoby jenom vzali tu kontinuitu, tak je to úplně šílenství.
Some people are getting tired of this subgenre at this point, but Dark Souls is a big deal, and From Software games in particular are still making huge waves to this day. Next, over at number 7, we have Doom, the original Doom from 1993.
Hell yeah.
Doom was an absolutely massive deal. It was huge for the gaming world, but also for the PC gaming community.
Jaká doba ta férový Doom má být jako number 1. Ne se Doom prostě, to ani náhodou.
Now, it's worth pointing out that the original first-person shooter in a 3-dimensional environment was pioneered by Wolf 3D, or Wolfenstein 3D, in 1992. But it was Doom in 1993 that really popularized the concept. Doom was a smash hit, specifically because it was so smooth and fun to play, and nobody had really seen anything like it up until that point. It was slightly creepy, it was kind of awesome and badass, it was gritty, it was gory, and it was addictive as hell. It also grew through...
No, tam jde o strašně moc věcí, kámo. Doom má třeba doteďka, bych řekl, nejlepší level design v FPS hrách. A to je to 30 let starý titul prostě. Jakože doteďka nechápu, jak dokázal, ty vole, to byl Romero? John Romero? Jak dokázal Romero jakoby se zbytkem toho týmu prostě udělat takovýhle jakoby deal breaker. Prostě Doom byla první hra, která měla patrový levely prostě třeba. Doteďka to tady nebylo nikdy nikde.
Through people sharing pirated copies of the game, people modding and making their own things out of it, and it had long legs for a very long time. Without Doom, I don't think we would really have first-person shooters like we do today. Because while you can argue that Wolf 3D was the grandfather of it all, Doom was really like the shotgun, the badass bloodied guy kicking the door down and revolutionizing the whole thing. Next, over at number 6, speaking of revolutions, we got to talk about Kill Switch, or Kill.Switch, like that's how it's written. This was a 2003 game that nobody gives enough love, but essentially it really blew out the modern third-person cover shooter genre, subgenre, whatever you want to call it. There had been plenty of third-person shooters up until this point, and plenty of third-person shooters that you could take cover up against a wall, maybe even pop out and fire your gun. But the way Kill Switch handled it essentially paved the way for how third-person shooters like, I don't know, Gears of War or Uncharted, how those control today. Kill Switch had you running and gunning in third-person.
To je, kámo, vážně první hra, která měla cover shoot systém, jo. To je zajímavý. Já jsem se teda myslel, že první bylo cocko. A to bych to zase možná i vsadil, že cocko bylo předtím, ty vole. Zajímavý. Nebylo. OK, jako říkám, můžu se plít v tomhletom, ale jsem jako zaražený z toho.
Shooting action, but taking cover up against a wall and being able to blind fire from corners. Another thing that I'm pretty sure we had seen at that point in some way or another, but the way Kill Switch handled the whole control scheme, the whole freedom of being on a wall and firing anywhere you want, including in front of you, blind fire, or popping out, it just worked smoothly. They figured it out. They cracked the code. Up until this point, all of those things I mentioned were clunky and often awkward. But Kill Switch really integrated it into the gameplay loop just right. Now, while the game wasn't like a mega hit or anything like that, it didn't really have compelling story or characters or anything like, you're kind of just like shooter guy. If you play a lot of games, and if you played a lot of games back then, you know that this thing really kicked off what we'd see a lot more to this day. A lot of the people that actually worked on the cover systems behind the scenes.
Tak abychom to byli naprosto féroví, tak určitě jakoby cover systém nejvíc zlepšili Gearsy. Že jo? Že jakoby Gearsy doslova jsou postavení na tom, že ty prostě ty vole někoho zabiješ, potom přeběhneš, schováš se a jdeš dál, že jo? No.
Would go on to work at different, bigger AAA studios, and that's where we're at now. But anytime I play a third-person shooter and I put my back up against the wall and I blind fire...
Tohle je nějaký starý Uncharted, je to možný?
We're at now. But anytime I play a third-person shooter and I put my back up against the wall and I blind fire or jump to another spot and cover, I always thank Kill Switch for its service. Next, over at number 5, we have the Thief games. The original Thief games really were pretty much the pinnacle.
Kámo, konečně to někdo zmínil. konečně.
Of stealth at the time, just simulation style stealth games. You had Thief the Dark Project in 1998 and Thief the Metal Age in 2000, and around at that point, for many years afterwards, like things never really moved forward in the stealth genre. You can argue that Splinter Cell and really Chaos Theory expanded upon that in their own ways, but there wasn't really anything like Thief again. While the original...
Já mám člověče pocit, že to je kvůli tomu, že hráči nemají rádi stealth. Celkově. Že prostě lidi chtějí někam jako dojít, zastřelit pár věcí a projít to. A že prostě lidi jakoby neradi plánujou průchod prostě hrou. A teďko jako já třeba to jakoby miluju, tohle, ale věřím tomu, že jsem v nějaký jako prostě menšině, jo. Takže on je potom pochopitelný, že těch stealth her je strašně málo.
Metal Gear for the MSX in 1987 really kind of coined the whole stealth concept, essentially you trying to avoid combat. I think it was the Thief games that made some people stealth game addicts and really proved that it could be a genre or a subgenre all its own. Granted, like I said, there weren't a lot of games to do it much better than 1998 and 2000s games in the series, but they are significant for a reason. These games are revolutions in their own way.
You're going down. Here's one.
Next over at number 4, we have Metal Gear Solid in 1998. Now, I am completely biased, cards on the table. If you guys have been watching Game Ranks for a while now...
Ne, to já jsem taky kámo bias. Tohle to je top titul prostě.
Jake Metal Gear is just a big old Metal Gear Solid fanboy, just a big sweaty. But Metal Gear Solid was a revolution for the time. Like I said, props to Metal Gear in 1987 for kind of bringing stealth to the forefront, but it was Metal Gear Solid in 1998 that really pushed forward how video game stories are told and presented in a cinematic way. There were games before Metal Gear Solid with cutscenes, there were third-person action-adventure games with stories, but it was the way Metal Gear Solid portrayed it all, clearly heavily inspired by movies, but weaving its own...
Tak já mám popsat, no, jakoby Metal Gear Solid 1 bylo takový Last of Us na PlayStation 1. Akorát samozřejmě jakoby trošku s jiným takem. Jakože opravdu ty charaktery, které tam byly, od Solid Snakea přes Marilyn, přes Big Bosse, přes Colonela, ty vole, přes ježišmarja, Revolvera, Ocelota a tak dále, to bylo neuvěřitelný. Doteďka nechápu, jak to dokázalo vzniknout.
Weird, complicated narrative through over-the-top, cinematic, choreographed, stylish cutscenes, great dialogue, tense sequences in codex. Maybe not the stories themselves. There were plenty of other games in the 90s that had kick-ass stories. Some people will argue better than Metal Gear Solid's, but really just the way these stories were presented. Metal Gear Solid did not invent the cutscene, but it made it more awesome.
Yep.
Next over at number 3, we have Halo. Halo and then Halo 2 and the multiplayer really kicking it off revolutionized first-person shooting, specifically on consoles. Because at that point, Bungie had really figured it out. They cracked the code. There were plenty of other awesome...
Jinak jakoby, je to takový vtipný se o tom bavit. Halo nikdy jakoby v Evropě nebylo moc velký. Vždycky to byla primárně jako Amerika. Ale ty vole, to, co se děje v posledních letech s Halem, to je... kámo. Který Halo bylo poslední kvalitní? 3? Combat Evolved? Jako to je taky prostě strašný, že
first person shooters on consoles. I played them all, I love them. I'm still like a Red Faction and
Reach, to je pořád 3, ne? 3 a Reach, jo, takže to je 3,5, jo.
Console Turok Die Hard, but it was really Halo that figured out the control scheme and kind of changed the way developers would think about control schemes for consoles.
Yes.
They figured it out. It was fun and accessible to play, easy to pick up, tough to master, with tons of...
On to je prostě hlavně kvůli tomu, já mám tady takový jako dost netradiční jako názor na tohleto, jo. Já si prostě nemyslím, že by Halo bylo někdy jako nějaký mega kvalitní, ale kvůli tomu, že Američani jsou národ konzolářů, tak tohle byla první střílečka na konzoli, která se dobře hrála. Protože všechno ostatní byly porty z PC. A ono právě díky tomu, že tohle byla jakoby první hra, která byla konzole first a ne jakoby konzole second, tak to bylo tak strašně úspěšný. No, takže takhle bych to prostě vzal jako já, že přijde mi, že bylo mraky a mraky jakoby jiných lepších stříleček i v této době. A na PC samozřejmě. Na konzolích rozhodně ne.
nuance, great precision, and the two-weapon system was incredibly unique and influential. So there was that, and then twofold. The fact that multiplayer was a big thing with these games, and then by the time Halo 2 came out, it was massive, and with the rise of Xbox Live, Halo, of course, didn't invent any type of first-person shooter, multiplayer, anything. I'm looking at Quake and all that, but for mainstream console popularity, they did a really good job pushing things forward. Next, over at number 2, of course, we have Grand Theft Auto 3.
Halo se třeba zbláznil uživatele, ty vole, prosím tě, jako proč bych to dělal?
Released in 2001, this pushed open worlds, sandbox-style driving games to the next level because Rockstar gave us an entirely explorable city. This fictional Liberty City let you drive any car you want, go anywhere you want.
Já si naprosto souhlasím, no. Kdybych tam dal jakýkoliv GTA, tak GTA 3 byla ta jediná, která opravdu jakoby ty vole rozbila všechno, že jo. Prostě GTA 3 a vedle toho první Mafie, tak byly fakt ty vole hry, které úplně změnily celý ten žánr.
At any point, I mean, besides the bridges that were closed, but you get the point. Games had tackled some of these elements separately and great in their own ways, but it was really Grand Theft Auto that packaged it all together and, of course, blasted it into the stratosphere with mainstream popularity, influencing so many games after it. And I'm not just talking like Grand Theft Auto clones or games that were trying to ape that exact formula, but just the open world genre itself. To this day, people want their games bigger, wide open, with huge explorable worlds. And I think a large part of that was everybody's exposure to this, to Grand Theft Auto 3. It was also a revolution in its own way for just being edgy and being in the media, for being too controversial.
Ne, tak to je, kámo, všechno dohromady, že jo, to byla prostě hudba, to byla akce, agrese, to bylo zabíjení, to bylo ježdění autem, to byla ta volnost, prostě ty vole. Já se doteďka prostě myslím, že nejlepší herní mechanika, tak je prostě akorát použít to, co mají lidi rádi. A ono, ty vole, jste si prostě třeba v San Andreas sedli prostě večer do auta, a teďko tam začal hrát třeba ten Snoop Dogg, tak najednou úplně kámo. Prostě, co tady řešíš, ty vole, že jo? Jako, tohle to je něco, co se jakoby nedá naprogramovat, podle mě. To prostě je něco, co funguje sama o sobě. Ta hudba byla z tohoto hrozně velkou součástí.
Too violent for kids. It wasn't the first game to do that. I mean, we're looking at Mortal Kombat, but it was another one to really push that whole thing forward. Grand Theft Auto at this point is, of course, like one of the biggest selling properties ever. It is an absolute monolith, a mega hit. But from those specific choices, from the humble early days, they laid the foundation for games for years to come. We're still talking about Grand Theft Auto and its significance to this day. Now down to number 1, Super Mario 64.
Hello! Yes.
This was an absolute revolution.
Nesouhlasím s tím, že to je number 1, ale souhlasím s tím, že má být v top 10. Ta hra skutečně byla revoluce.
For platformers, for really pushing them from 2D to 3D. Did Mario 64 invent the 3D platformer? No, but maybe more how it flows, how it goes, what you're doing, it really nailed it. Because we had alpha waves in the early 90s, and then we had Jumping Flash on PlayStation in 1995. Those were technically 3D platformers, but it was Mario 64 that really cracked the code, figured it out, and made it so much more fun and popularized it. After Mario 64, 3D platformers were a heavyweight genre for a long time. I mean, that year was solid. Mario 64 released, and soon after it was Crash Bandicoot, and things just kept going from there. But Mario 64 really managed to nail that fun factor, really figure out that...
Bez tohoto stream, já budu člověče chtít jednoho dne konečně to dohrát se všema hvězdama. Konečně. Ale, jako, já jsem viděl takových speedrunů z tohoto. A já nevěřím tomu, že to dohraju za stream. Prostě ono to je i tak hrozně těžký.
Something, that thing that's hard to identify, and how they've translated Mario gameplay from 2D to 3D. They're absolute badasses for doing it. And although 3D platformers aren't quite as popular as they used to be, we still love them. They have a big place in our heart.
No, to bylo takových revolucí, kámo. od engineu
But those are 10 games that revolutionized genres, some stuff we wanted to talk about today. Of course, it's worth mentioning that there are so many other games that have revolutionized a genre, a game mechanic, created their own genre. So let us know in the comments any games you want to talk about. We couldn't fit them all on this list. We have to do a part 2, so we'd love to know your choices, for real. Now, let us know what you think, but if you like this video and you like us just talking games every day with you guys, clicking the like button's all you gotta do. It helps us out. And if you're new, consider subscribing, maybe hitting that notification bell, because we put out new videos every single day. But either way, as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
Nice.